She lay unconscious by the Duke's manor gates until he lifted her and whispered, "You're home now." Snow fell in swirling sheets across the moors, blanketing the countryside in a shroud of pristine white. The iron gates of Thornfield Manor stood like silent sentinels, their intricate scrollwork encased in crystalline frost. The wind howled through the bare branches of ancient oaks, carrying with it the bitter cold of a December night. It was there, beneath the imposing arch of the manor gates, that the Duke of Ravensworth found her. A figure draped in tattered cloth, her form so still against the snow that she might have been merely a shadow cast by the moonlight. Her face, half buried in white powder, bore the delicate features of youth, though pallor had claimed what must once have been roses in her cheeks. "Good heavens," the Duke whispered, dismounting from his stallion with uncustomary haste. The beast snorted clouds of steam into the frigid air, pouring at the ground as though sensing the gravity of their discovery. Lord Ravensworth knelt beside the woman, removing his glove to press 2 fingers against her neck. A pulse, faint but present, fluttered beneath his touch. Relief washed over his features, softening the hard lines that years of solitude had etched into his countenance. "William," he called to his coachman, who approached with trepidation, "assist me." With utmost care, the Duke gathered the unconscious woman into his arms. Her weight was troublingly slight, her skin cold as marble. A simple glass pendant hung from her neck, catching the moonlight in its facets, the only adornment on her person that suggested any history at all. "My lord," the coachman began, his voice betraying his discomfort, "perhaps we might summon the parish." "She would perish before they arrived," the Duke interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "The manor is warmer, and Mrs. Blackwood shall attend her." The household staff stood in stunned silence as their master carried the unconscious woman through the grand entrance. 15 years had passed since the Duke had returned from the continent, and in those years not a single visitor had crossed the threshold of Thornfield Manor. The house had become as much a mausoleum as a residence, its halls silent, its rooms shrouded in perpetual twilight. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, made the sign of the cross when she beheld the scene. "My lord," she gasped, "who is this unfortunate creature?" "I know not," replied the Duke, "but prepare the blue room. Send for Dr. Maxwell without delay." The Duke carried his burden up the grand staircase, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors, whose eyes seemed to follow his progress with silent judgment. The woman in his arms stirred slightly, a small sound escaping her lips. Not quite a word, but enough to send a strange sensation through the Duke's chest. "You are safe now," he murmured, though she could not hear him. "You are home." Later, as Dr. Maxwell concluded his examination, the Duke stood by the window, watching the relentless snowfall. The physician's prognosis had been guardedly hopeful: exhaustion, exposure, malnourishment, but no permanent injury that he could discern. "She shall require time and care, Your Grace," the doctor said, packing away his instruments, "and perhaps answers when she wakes." The Duke nodded, his gaze still fixed upon the swirling white beyond the glass. "She shall have both." "If I may be so bold, Your Grace," ventured the doctor, "this is most unlike you." At this the Duke turned, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "Perhaps it is time for change, Maxwell." The doctor departed, leaving the Duke alone with the sleeping woman and his housekeeper, who fussed over the bed linens with obvious disquiet. "Mrs. Blackwood," the Duke said softly, "pray, what troubles you?" The older woman hesitated, her hands stilling on the coverlet. "My lord, the tongue shall talk. A woman alone brought to your house in such a manner—" "Let them talk," he replied, a note of steel entering his voice. "I have endured their whispers these 15 years. I shall not falter now for the sake of propriety." Mrs. Blackwood curtsied, chastened. "As you wish, Your Grace." The Duke approached the bedside, studying the face of the woman who had, by mere happenstance, broken the long solitude of Thornfield Manor. What circumstances had brought her to his gates? What storms had she weathered before the literal one that had claimed her consciousness? Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing all tracks, all history, creating a world made new and clean. Within the blue room, the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across walls that had not known such animation in more than a decade. "You're home now," he whispered again, though he could not say why the words felt both foreign and familiar on his tongue. "You're home." Dawn arrived with tentative fingers of light that crept through the frost-patterned windows. The woman stirred beneath the heavy counterpane, her eyelids fluttering like wounded birds before opening fully to reveal eyes of striking clarity, grey as the winter sky, ringed with a deeper blue. For a moment, confusion clouded her gaze as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. the canopied bed with its azure hangings, the polished oak furniture, the portrait of a severe-looking gentleman above the mantelpiece. Then panic seized her features, and she attempted to rise only to fall back against the pillows with a soft cry. "Pray do not distress yourself," came a gentle voice from beside the bed. Mrs. Blackwood moved into her field of vision, holding a cup of steaming tea. "For you are quite safe, miss." "Where am I?" the young woman asked, her voice barely audible, roughened by what must have been days of disuse. "How came I here?" "Thornfield Manor," replied Mrs. Blackwood, assisting her to sit upright enough to sip the tea. "His Grace the Duke of Ravensworth found you unconscious at the gates last evening. The physician has attended you and prescribed rest, above all else." The young woman's fingers trembled around the cup. "The Duke? He brought me here himself?" "Indeed, miss, carried you in his own arms, he did." The housekeeper's tone betrayed her continuing bemusement at this fact. "Now, might I inquire as to your name?" A shadow passed across the woman's features. She touched the glass pendant at her throat, as though seeking reassurance from its presence. "Violet," she answered after a pause. "Violet Thorn." "Well, Miss Thorn, you are most fortunate. Another hour in that snowstorm, and I dare say we should be preparing a burial rather than breakfast." Violet's eyes widened at the blunt assessment. "I am indebted to his Grace, then. I must thank him and take my leave as soon as I am able." Mrs. Blackwood clucked her tongue. "Leave? In this weather? The roads are quite impassable, miss. The snow has not ceased since yestereve." Before Violet could respond, a knock sounded at the door, and Mrs. Blackwood moved to answer it. The Duke himself stood in the corridor, his tall figure silhouetted against the gallery windows behind him. "Mrs. Blackwood, how fares our guest?" he inquired. "Awake and taking tea, your Grace," the housekeeper replied with a curtsy. "May I enter?" "Of course, my lord, it is your house after all." The Duke stepped into the room, and Violet found herself shrinking back against the pillows. He cut an imposing figure, broad-shouldered in his perfectly tailored coat, his features handsome in a severe way, like a statue carved by a master who preferred gravity to joy. Yet his eyes, when they met hers, held an unexpected warmth. "Miss Thorn, your Grace," Mrs. Blackwood supplied. "Miss Violet Thorn." "Miss Thorn." The Duke bowed slightly, a gesture of such formal courtesy that Violet felt suddenly conscious of her dishevelled appearance and borrowed nightgown. "I am Edmund Blackwood, Duke of Ravensworth. I trust you have been made comfortable." "Most comfortable, your Grace," Violet replied, lowering her eyes. "I am deeply grateful for your intervention. Had you not found me—" She could not complete the thought. "Fortune guided my return at the precise moment," the Duke said, his tone even. "I had been abroad these 3 months and chose last evening to return, despite my staff's concerns regarding the weather. It seems Providence had a purpose in my stubbornness." Violet clutched the pendant more tightly. "I shall impose upon your hospitality only until the roads are clear, your Grace." A slight frown creased the Duke's brow. "You misunderstand, Miss Thorn. This is not an imposition, but a duty of care. You shall remain at Thornfield until you are fully recovered, regardless of the weather's whims." "But surely, your Grace, the propriety would have seen you frozen at my gates," he interrupted, a flash of something like anger crossing his features. "I shall not sacrifice compassion at the altar of social convention." His voice softened as he added, "There are guest rooms aplenty, and Mrs. Blackwood shall serve as chaperone to satisfy the strictures of decorum." Mrs. Blackwood nodded her agreement, though her expression suggested she found the entire situation most irregular. The Duke moved toward the window, where frost had created delicate patterns like ferns across the glass. "Might I inquire, Miss Thorn, what circumstances led you to Thornfield? We are quite isolated here." Violet hesitated, her fingers twisting in the counterpane. "I was travelling to Millfield, your Grace, where I have been engaged as a governess. The coach was beset by the storm and overturned some miles back. I thought I could continue on foot." It was not the entire truth, but neither was it wholly false. The Duke studied her face for a long moment, and Violet had the distinct impression that he detected the omission. "Millfield is the estate of Lord Pembroke," he said at length. "I shall send word when possible that you are safe in my care." "You are too kind, your Grace." The Duke inclined his head. "Rest now, Miss Thorn. We shall speak again when you have regained your strength." As he turned to leave, Violet called after him, her voice stronger than before. "Your Grace, thank you for saving my life." The Duke paused in the doorway, his profile outlined against the light from the gallery. "In truth, Miss Thorn," he said quietly, "I believe it may be you who shall save mine." With those cryptic words he departed, leaving Violet to ponder their meaning as Mrs. Blackwood bustled about the room, muttering about the strangeness of noblemen and the impropriety of unexpected houseguests. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing Thornfield Manor and its occupants in a world apart, a world where past and future hung suspended like the crystalline flakes that drifted endlessly from the leaden sky. The days that followed unfolded in a dreamlike procession for Violet. Strength returned to her limbs gradually, like the slow awakening of a garden after winter's grip has loosened. She progressed from taking short walks around the Blue Room to venturing into the long gallery that extended the length of the manor's eastern wing. Thornfield was a house of contradictions, grand in proportion yet austere in decoration. Portraits of Blackwood ancestors lined the corridors, their stern gazes following visitors with painted disapproval. Rooms stood perfectly appointed, yet somehow hollow, as though the soul of the house had departed long ago, leaving only its immaculate shell behind. "His Grace has not entertained since the tragedy," Mrs. Blackwood confided one afternoon, as she accompanied Violet on her constitutional through the gallery. 15 years this February past. "Tragedy?" Violet inquired, pausing before a portrait of a woman whose kind eyes provided a stark contrast to the severity of the other paintings. "Mrs." Blackwood's voice lowered to a whisper, though no one else was present to overhear. "The Duchess, his brother's wife, and their daughter, lost in a fire at the London house. His Grace was abroad when it happened." Violet studied the portrait more closely. The woman possessed a gentle beauty, her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a small girl with solemn eyes. "This is she? The Duchess?" "Indeed, miss. Lady Catherine Blackwood, wed to the Duke's elder brother, Lord James. She was beloved by all who knew her. And the child?" "Miss Isabella," Mrs. Blackwood replied, a shadow crossing her features. "Just 5 years old when the fire claimed them both. Lord James perished of grief not 6 months later, and thus the dukedom passed to his Grace, who had never expected nor desired the title." Violet's hand moved unconsciously to touch her glass pendant. "How terrible. No wonder the house feels—" She trailed off, uncertain how to express the sense of suspended mourning that permeated Thornfield. "Haunted," Mrs. Blackwood supplied. "Aye, though not by spirits, miss, by memories. His Grace returned from the continent a changed man, took up the title with duty but without joy. He manages the estate impeccably, sees to his tenants with fairness, but as for living—" She shook her head. "I dare say he merely exists." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Duke himself, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Mrs. Blackwood curtsied and excused herself, leaving Violet alone with her benefactor for the first time since her awakening. "Miss Thorne," the Duke greeted her, his voice carrying in the vaulted space of the gallery, "it gladdens me to see you well enough to explore. Does Thornfield meet with your approval?" Violet curtsied, conscious of her borrowed dress. One of the housekeepers altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. "It is magnificent, Your Grace. I have never been in a house of such grandeur." "Grandeur without purpose becomes mere ostentation," he replied, moving to stand beside her before the portrait. "I see you have met my family, after a fashion." "Mrs. Blackwood was kind enough to explain the circumstances of your inheritance," Violet said cautiously. "I am deeply sorry for your loss." The Duke's face remained impassive, but his eyes, when they met hers, held an ocean of unspoken grief. "It was long ago. Some wounds never fully heal, Your Grace. Time may dull their edge, but the scar remains." He regarded her with subtle surprise. "You speak with the wisdom of one who has known loss intimately." Violet looked away, her fingers once again finding the comfort of her pendant. "We are all orphans of one sort or another, are we not?" "Indeed." The Duke gestured toward the long windows that lined the gallery, where snow continued to fall in gentle curtains. "I fear you shall remain our guest some days longer, Miss Thorne. The north road to Millfield remains impassable. I hope I do not inconvenience you unduly." "On the contrary," he replied, his tone softening slightly. "Your presence has brought a certain vitality back to Thornfield. The staff whisper that you have awakened the house." Violet felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I cannot imagine how." "Can you not?" The Duke's gaze was penetrating. "Since your arrival, fires burn in grates long cold. Rooms shuttered for years have been opened to air. Even Mrs. Blackwood hums as she goes about her duties, a phenomenon I had begun to believe mythical." A tentative smile touched Violet's lips. "Perhaps it is merely the approach of Christmas, Your Grace." "Perhaps," he conceded, though his expression suggested he thought otherwise. "Speaking of which, I have taken the liberty of having some suitable garments delivered from the village modiste. Mrs. Blackwood's alterations, while admirable, cannot provide adequately for the season. Your Grace, I cannot accept. You can and you shall, he interrupted, not unkindly. Consider it a Christmas benevolence if your pride demands an explanation. Violet bit her lip, torn between gratitude and discomfort at being the object of such generosity. You are too kind, sir. Kindness has not been attributed to me in many years, Miss Thorne. A shadow of a smile crossed his face, the first she had seen. I find I do not object to its return. Their conversation might have continued, but for the arrival of a messenger, snow-covered and breathless, bearing a letter sealed with an impressive crest. The Duke excused himself to receive it, leaving Violet once again alone among the watchful portraits. That evening, as she dined privately in her room, still deemed too weak for the formality of the great dining hall, Mrs. Blackwood arrived with news. His Grace departs for London on the morrow, the housekeeper announced as she arranged Violet's tray. Urgent business requires his attention. He instructs that you are to consider Thornfield your home until his return. London? In this weather? Violet's surprise was genuine. Surely the roads. For the common traveller, perhaps, Mrs. Blackwood replied, with a hint of pride. But his Grace's carriage is specially outfitted for winter journeys. He shall manage, though the journey will take thrice as long as in fair conditions. Violet gazed out at the falling snow, a strange disquiet settling over her. In just days, the Duke had transformed from mysterious benefactor to something approaching a friend. The thought of Thornfield without his commanding presence seemed wrong somehow, as though the house might revert to its former desolation in his absence. "Did he leave any message for me?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Mrs. Blackwood gave her a knowing look. "Only that you are not to attempt departure before his return, regardless of the weather's improvement." He was most insistent on that point. Later that night, unable to sleep despite her comfortable surroundings, Violet rose and moved to the window. The snow had finally ceased and moonlight spilled across the grounds, transforming Thornfield into a realm of silver and shadow. In the distance, the gates where she had been found stood sentinel, marking the boundary between the haven she had found and the world that had nearly claimed her life. Her fingers closed around the glass pendant, its familiar contours offering comfort as they had throughout her life. Within its crystal depths, visible only when held to the light at a certain angle, was the faint outline of a crest, a design she had never been able to fully discern, yet had treasured nonetheless. "Who am I?" she whispered to the empty room. "And why does this place feel so strangely like home?" The moonlight offered no answers, only casting her reflection back at her, a pale ghost against the darkness of Thornfield Manor. The Duke's departure left Thornfield Manor in a curious state of suspended animation. Though the staff continued their duties with characteristic efficiency, there existed a palpable sense that all were merely awaiting His Grace's return, like actors pausing between scenes, uncertain of their next cues. For Violet, however, the days unfolded with unexpected pleasure. Freed from the intensity of the Duke's presence, she found herself exploring the vast house with growing confidence. The promised garments arrived, modest but finely made dresses in shades of blue and grey that complemented her colouring, accompanied by warm shawls and proper shoes. "You look a proper lady now," Mrs. Blackwood observed one morning, as Violet descended the grand staircase in a dress of dove grey, with subtle blue embroidery at the cuffs and collar. "His Grace has excellent taste for a gentleman. Did the Duke select these himself?" Violet asked, smoothing the soft wool with appreciative fingers. "Indeed, miss. Left specific instructions with Madame Beaumont in the village, most particular about the colours. The housekeeper's expression suggested she found this detail both peculiar and telling. Violet felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "How attentive of him." "Indeed," Mrs. Blackwood repeated with a meaningful arch of her brow. The temporary thaw that allowed the Duke's departure proved fleeting. Within days, winter reasserted its dominance with renewed vigour. Snow fell in relentless sheets, and fierce winds howled around the manor's stone corners like restless spirits seeking entrance. Yet within, all remained warm and increasingly inviting. Violet had taken to playing the pianoforte in the music room, an elegant space long neglected according to Mrs. Blackwood. Though her skill was modest, the simple melodies she coaxed from the instrument seemed to bring a subtle change to the household atmosphere. "It has been 15 years since music graced these halls," Mr. Bradford, the butler, commented one evening as Violet concluded a simple nocturne. The elderly man stood in the doorway, his typically stoic expression softened by memory. I fear I do the instrument little justice, Violet replied, closing the lid with careful reverence. It is not the complexity of the tune, but the presence of it that matters, Miss Thorne. Bradford's voice held uncharacteristic emotion. This house has known silence too long. On the 10th day of the Duke's absence, as Violet assisted Mrs. Blackwood in cataloguing the library's extensive collection, a peculiar discovery occurred. Behind a row of leather-bound agricultural treatises, she found a slim volume that appeared to have been hastily concealed. "What have you there, miss?" the housekeeper inquired, looking up from her inventory. Violet held up the book, a collection of children's tales, its spine cracked from frequent opening to a particular page. A pressed flower, long dried but still retaining a faint lavender hue, marked the story of a lost princess found sleeping in the snow. "How curious," Violet murmured, touching the delicate bloom with gentle fingers. Mrs. Blackwood's face paled slightly. "That belonged to Miss Isabella. His Grace would read to her whenever he visited from the continent." Violet carefully returned the flower to its place. "Did they share a close bond?" "The closest," Mrs. Blackwood replied, her voice lowering though they were alone. "His Grace was more father to her than Lord James, who was often in London on affairs of state. When news of the fire reached him in Vienna—" She shook her head, unable to complete the thought. Violet replaced the book exactly as she had found it, sensing its importance as a relic of happier times. It must have been unbearable. "He searched the ruins himself, they say," Mrs. Blackwood continued, seemingly compelled to unburden herself of the long-held story. "For days, until his hands were raw from shifting debris. They never found the child's remains, consumed entirely by the flames, the authorities concluded." That night, strange dreams visited Violet's slumber, visions of fire and falling snow, of gates opening to reveal familiar yet unknown faces. She woke with tears on her cheeks, the glass pendant clutched so tightly in her hand that its edges left an imprint on her palm. The following morning brought an unexpected break in the weather, a pale winter sun emerging to cast diamond light across the snow-laden grounds. Violet, restless after her troubled night, requested permission to walk in the gardens. "Stay within sight of the house," Mrs. Blackwood cautioned, providing a heavy cloak lined with fur. "The weather has been most changeable." The gardens of Thornfield, even in winter's grip, retained a stark beauty. Formal hedges stood like sentinels beneath their white mantles, and frozen fountains held water in eternal suspension. Violet walked slowly, her breath forming clouds before her, following paths cleared by the groundskeeper. It was near the eastern wall, partially concealed by an ancient yew tree, that she discovered the small family cemetery. Stone angels stood guard over generations of Blackwoods, their wings spread in eternal vigilance against the elements. One memorial stone, newer than its neighbours, bore 3 names: James Blackwood, Viscount Thornfield, Lady Catherine Blackwood, Isabella Blackwood, gone from sight but never from heart. Beneath these words, a small glass case had been set into the stone, containing a child's bracelet of silver links and a single charm, a tiny house with windows of blue stone. "Home is where one starts from," came a deep voice from behind her. Violet turned with a start to find the Duke standing several paces away, his tall figure silhouetted against the snow-bright landscape. His clothing bore the signs of hasty travel, and fatigue lined his features, yet his eyes remained alert as they studied her. "Your Grace," she gasped, dropping into a curtsy. "I had not expected your return so soon." "Nor had I anticipated it," he replied, moving forward to stand beside her before the memorial. "Yet my business concluded more rapidly than foreseen, and I found myself eager to return." Violet lowered her eyes, uncertain how to interpret his words or the intensity with which he regarded her. "I hope your journey was not too arduous. The roads were treacherous, but I have weathered worse." He gestured toward the memorial. "I see you have found them. Forgive me if I intruded upon private grief." "There is nothing to forgive." The Duke's voice softened as he gazed at the names etched in stone. "They were lost to me long before this marker was raised. The cemetery merely formalizes an absence I have carried within me these 15 years. Impulsively, Violet placed her gloved hand upon his arm, a gesture of comfort she would never have dared before his departure. To lose so much, so suddenly, I cannot imagine such pain. The Duke glanced down at her hand, then back to her face with an expression she could not decipher. "Cannot you, Miss Thorne?" he asked quietly. "I have observed in you the same shadows that I carry, the look of one who has known profound loss." Violet withdrew her hand, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of the gesture. "We all bear our burdens, Your Grace." "Indeed." He offered his arm. "Shall we return to the house? The temperature falls with the sun, and I would not have you risk a relapse." As they walked the snowy path toward Thornfield Manor, the Duke spoke of his time in London, meetings with solicitors, matters of estate business. Yet Violet sensed he omitted something significant. There was a tension in his bearing that had not been present before his departure, a watchfulness in his gaze when he thought she did not notice. They had nearly reached the house when he paused, turning to face her fully. "Miss Thorne, while in London, I took the liberty of inquiring after Lord Pembroke's household at Millfield." Violet felt her heart quicken. "Oh, there is no record of a governess position being filled, nor of one being offered." His tone remained gentle despite the implicit accusation. "Indeed, the family departed for the continent some months ago, and is not expected to return until spring." The blood drained from Violet's face. She had been discovered in her falsehood. "Your Grace, I do not seek an explanation at this moment," he interrupted, his expression unreadable. "The hour grows late, and you tremble from cold. We shall speak further after dinner, if you are well enough to join me in the library." Without waiting for her response, he guided her toward the house, where the windows glowed with welcoming light against the gathering dusk. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 8 as Violet descended the staircase, each chime reverberating through her like a solemn warning. She had dressed with particular care in the finest of her new garments, a gown of midnight blue that lent her eyes a deeper hue. Her hair, usually confined to a simple knot, had been arranged by Mrs. Blackwood's maid in a more becoming style, with soft tendrils framing her face. The housekeeper had informed her that the Duke awaited her in the library rather than the formal dining room, a more intimate setting that both relieved and discomfited Violet. As she approached the heavy oak door, she took a steadying breath, her fingers instinctively seeking the comfort of her glass pendant. "Enter," came the Duke's voice at her knock. The library of Thornfield Manor was a sanctuary of knowledge, 2 stories of leather-bound volumes lining walls of polished oak, with a central fireplace that cast dancing light across comfortable furnishings. The Duke stood before this fire, a glass of amber liquid in hand, his formal dinner attire emphasizing his imposing stature. "Miss Thorne," he greeted her, setting aside his drink to bow. "I am pleased you felt equal to joining me." Violet curtsied, careful to maintain composure despite her inner turmoil. "I could hardly decline such a specific invitation, Your Grace." A shadow of a smile crossed his features. "Indeed, even in my self-imposed exile, I have not forgotten all social graces." He gestured toward a table set for 2 near the fire. "Shall we dine? I have instructed the staff to serve us here, away from the echoing formality of the dining room." The meal progressed in relative silence, broken only by the Duke's occasional inquiries about her comfort at Thornfield and her recovery. Only after the final course had been cleared, and they were once again alone, did he approach the subject that hung between them like an unspoken accusation. "Miss Thorne," he began, his tone measured as he resumed his position before the fire, "I find myself in an unusual predicament. I have welcomed into my home a young woman who, by her own admission, has provided me with false information regarding her circumstances." Violet's hands twisted in her lap. "Your Grace," he raised a hand, "allow me to finish if you would. Under normal conditions, such a discovery would necessitate your immediate removal from Thornfield. However, these are hardly normal conditions. The weather remains inclement, you are still recovering your strength, and—" He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "And I find myself curiously disinclined to see you go." Violet raised her eyes to meet his, startled by this admission. "Therefore," he continued, "I propose an exchange, your truth for my continued hospitality. No judgment shall follow your revelation, whatever it may be. You have my word as a gentleman." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, sending shadows dancing across the Duke's austere features. In that moment, Violet made her decision. If he offered honesty, she would match it with her own. "My name is indeed Violet Thorne," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I was never engaged as a governess at Millfield. I was fleeing, Your Grace, fleeing a situation that had become untenable." "From whom were you fleeing, Miss Thorne?" "My guardian, Sir Percival Croft." The name passed her lips like poison being extracted. "Upon my parents' death in India 10 years ago, I became his ward. He was my father's business associate, though I later discovered their partnership was less than honorable." The Duke's expression darkened. "I am acquainted with Sir Percival. His reputation in certain circles is questionable." "Then you understand why I could not remain." Violet rose, moving to the window, where frost patterns resembled delicate ferns. For years I served as little more than an unpaid companion to his wife, Lady Margaret, but upon her passing last autumn, Sir Percival made it clear that he expected other considerations from me. The Duke's jaw tightened visibly. He proposed marriage. "No, Your Grace," Violet replied, a flush of shame heating her cheeks. "He proposed an arrangement far less respectable. When I refused, he threatened to commit me to an asylum, claiming hysteria and moral degeneracy." "Unconscionable," the Duke muttered, his hand clenching around his glass. "I fled with only what I could carry, my mother's pendant, a small sum saved from my allowance, and the clothes upon my back." Violet touched the glass at her throat. "The mail coach was indeed bound for Millfield, but my true destination was York, where my old governess now resides. I thought perhaps she might help me secure a position. And then the storm intervened." "Yes." The coach overturned. The other passengers were taken in by a nearby farm, but in the confusion I became separated. I wandered for hours before glimpsing your gates." She turned back to face him. "The rest, you know." The Duke studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "I believe you, Miss Thorne. Your account bears the unmistakable ring of truth." Relief washed over Violet like a physical wave. "Thank you, Your Grace. However," he continued, moving to stand before her, "your situation remains precarious. Sir Percival is not a man to relinquish what he considers his property. Should he discover your whereabouts, I have no doubt he would attempt to reclaim you by any means available to him." "I have imposed upon your kindness far too long already," Violet said quickly. "Once the road's clear, I shall continue to York as planned." The Duke shook his head. "I cannot in good conscience allow it. Without references or connections, your prospects are grim at best. Even should you reach your former governess, what security could she offer against a man of Sir Percival's influence?" "What alternative exists?" Violet asked, a note of desperation entering her voice. "I cannot remain at Thornfield indefinitely. The impropriety—" "Propriety be damned," the Duke interrupted with sudden vehemence. "Forgive my language, Miss Thorne, but I weary of society's dictates when they serve only to endanger those already vulnerable." He paced before the fire, his expression fierce with concentration. "There is a solution, though it may appear unorthodox. My solicitor in London has connections with a shipping company. Passage could be arranged to America, where Sir Percival's reach would not extend. With suitable introductions and a modest sum to establish yourself, you might begin anew, free from his shadow." Violet stared at him, astonished by the offer. "Your Grace, such generosity is beyond anything I could accept." "It is not generosity but justice that motivates me," he replied, his gaze intense. "I have means far beyond my needs, Miss Thorne. What purpose do they serve if not to right such wrongs when they present themselves?" His words touched something deep within Violet, a longing for security she had scarcely allowed herself to acknowledge in the years since her parents' deaths. Yet the thought of crossing an ocean, of never again seeing England or the Duke, filled her with an unexpected sorrow. I must consider your offer," she managed at last. "It represents a future I had not dared imagine." "Of course," his tone softened. "No decision need be made tonight. Rest, reflect, and we shall speak again when you are ready." As Violet prepared to take her leave, the Duke moved to open the library door for her. In the narrow space between them, she felt the subtle shift in the air, a current of unspoken connection that had been building since her arrival at Thornfield. "Miss Thorne," he said quietly as she passed him, "know that whatever you decide, you have a place here for as long as you require it. Thornfield has been merely a house these many years. Your presence has reminded me it might yet become a home again." With those words echoing in her mind, Violet returned to her chamber, her thoughts in tumult. America promised safety and a fresh beginning, yet the mere contemplation of departing Thornfield and its master caused an ache in her chest she could neither explain nor dismiss. Outside her window, snow began to fall once more, erasing all tracks upon the ground below, just as time might eventually erase all evidence of her brief sojourn at Thornfield Manor. 3 days passed in a curious suspension of routine. The Duke attended to estate business from his study each morning, while Violet divided her hours between the library and the music room, where she had begun instructing the housekeeper's niece, Jenny, on the pianoforte. The child's eager aptitude provided a welcome distraction from the decision that loomed over Violet's future. On the afternoon of the 4th day, as weak winter sunlight filtered through the music room windows, their lesson was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Blackwood, her usually composed features marked with distress. "Miss Thorne," the housekeeper began, casting a meaningful glance at her niece, "might I have a word in private? Jenny was dismissed with instructions to practice her scales, and once alone, Mrs. Blackwood closed the door with uncharacteristic urgency. "A rider has just arrived from the village," she said in hushed tones. "A gentleman has been making inquiries at the inn, asking after a young woman matching your description." Violet felt the blood drain from her face. "Did he give his name?" "He travels under the name Hamilton, but the innkeeper's description—" Mrs. Blackwood hesitated. "I fear it may be Sir Percival himself, miss." "How could he have traced me here?" Violet whispered, clutching the edge of the pianoforte for support. "Coaching inns keep records, miss. If he followed your trail from London—" The housekeeper shook her head. "His Grace has been informed and requests your presence in his study immediately." The Duke's study occupied the western corner of the manor, its windows offering views of both the front drive and the distant gates. He stood before these windows as Violet entered, his posture tense, hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Thorne," he said without turning, "I presume Mrs. Blackwood has informed you of our visitor's interest." "Yes, Your Grace." Violet fought to keep her voice steady. "If it is indeed Sir Percival—" "It is." The Duke turned to face her, his expression grave. "I recognize the description instantly. Sir Percival Croft is not a man easily forgotten, nor one I had hoped to encounter again." Violet's eyes widened. "You have met him personally?" "Several years ago in London, he sought investment in one of his ventures, a West Indies sugar plantation. I declined upon learning of his methods regarding the plantation's workforce. A muscle worked in the Duke's jaw. He did not take the refusal graciously. Then he would recognize your name," Violet said, understanding dawning. "If he discovers I am here—" "He shall not discover it," the Duke interrupted, moving to his desk where a sheet of paper lay waiting. "I have already dispatched instructions to my staff in the village. They will report that Thornfield remains closed for the season, its master abroad. Meanwhile, we must secure your safety should Sir Percival attempt a more direct inquiry." "I could depart immediately," Violet suggested, though the thought filled her with dread. "The weather has improved enough to permit travel. And where would you go, with Sir Percival watching the roads?" The Duke shook his head. "No, the wisest course is to remain at Thornfield, but with certain precautions." He outlined his plan with military precision. Violet would be moved to a suite of rooms in the manor's east wing, accessible only through a concealed passage from the library. The staff would be informed that she had departed for York with a trusted manservant, should Sir Percival's inquiries reach the house itself. "It is temporary," the Duke assured her, seeing her distress. "My man in London is already arranging passage to America as we discussed. Within a fortnight, you shall be beyond Sir Percival's reach entirely." Violet nodded, grateful for his foresight, yet increasingly troubled by the prospect of leaving England and Thornfield behind. "Your Grace, I cannot adequately express my gratitude for all you have done. You owe me no gratitude, Miss Thorne." His voice softened as he moved to stand before her. "In truth, it is I who am indebted to you." "To me? How can that be?" The Duke's gaze held hers with unexpected warmth. "You have brought life back to a house long shrouded in mourning. Before your arrival, I merely existed within these walls. Now—" he hesitated, seeming to search for words. "Now I find myself contemplating a future beyond mere duty and obligation." The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken sentiment. For a breathless moment, Violet thought he might reach for her hand, but a sudden commotion from the entrance hall shattered the fragile connection. Bradford's voice, uncharacteristically raised, carried through the door. "Sir, I must insist you cannot enter without—" A deeper voice, cultured yet cutting, interrupted. "Stand aside. I have business with the Duke of Ravensworth that will not wait upon formalities." The study door burst open to reveal a man of medium height and substantial girth, impeccably attired in a travelling coat of finest wool. His florid face bore the marks of dissipation partially concealed beneath a well-groomed beard, and his eyes, cold and calculating, fixed immediately upon Violet with an expression of triumphant malice. "Ah," said Sir Percival Croft, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. "I see my information was correct after all. The innkeeper's memory improved considerably when properly compensated." The Duke stepped forward, positioning himself between Violet and the intruder. "Sir Percival, you enter my home uninvited and unannounced. Explain yourself, or I shall have you removed forthwith." Sir Percival offered a mocking bow. "Your Grace, how delightful to renew our acquaintance under such interesting circumstances." His gaze slid past the Duke to Violet. "I have come to retrieve my ward, who absconded from my protection some weeks ago, I am most grateful to discover she has found shelter with a gentleman of your standing. Miss Thorne is under my protection, the Duke stated, his tone brooking no argument. She shall remain so until she chooses otherwise. A cold smile played across Sir Percival's lips. How chivalrous. Yet I fear the law stands firmly with me in this matter. As her legal guardian, I alone determine what is best for Miss Thorne's welfare. Your guardianship was predicated upon care and protection, neither of which you provided, the Duke countered. Indeed, by Miss Thorne's account, your intentions toward her were most improper. Sir Percival's expression hardened. The fanciful accusations of a disturbed young woman hardly constitute evidence, Your Grace. Miss Thorne has been unstable since her parents' tragic demise. It is precisely this emotional fragility that prompted my decision to seek professional care for her, a decision she subverted by fleeing. You lie, Violet said, finding her voice at last. You threatened me with the asylum when I refused your advances. I was nothing more than property to you, an investment to be exploited. You see? Sir Percival spread his hands in a gesture of affected concern. Paranoid delusions, most distressing. All the more reason she must return to my care immediately. The Duke's posture remained unyielding. Miss Thorne goes nowhere against her will. On that point, I am immovable. Then perhaps this will move you, Your Grace. Sir Percival withdrew a folded document from his coat. A warrant for Miss Thorne's return, signed by a magistrate who found her flight sufficient evidence of the instability I described. You may examine it at your leisure, though I assure you it is entirely legal. He passed the document to the Duke, who scanned it with growing concern. This appears in order, he admitted reluctantly, yet I question the circumstances under which it was obtained. Question all you wish, Sir Percival replied, with barely concealed triumph. The fact remains Miss Thorne is leaving with me today, or I shall return with the authorities, an outcome that would prove most disagreeable for all concerned, particularly in light of the impropriety of her residence in your household these past weeks. Violet felt her world contracting, darkness encroaching at the edges of her vision. All hope of escape, of freedom, seemed to evaporate under Sir Percival's malevolent gaze. She would be committed to the asylum after all, her protestations dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. If I might examine this warrant more thoroughly, the Duke said, his voice cutting through her spiral of despair. Bradford, show Sir Percival to the drawing-room and provide refreshment. I shall join him shortly with my decision. Sir Percival hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Violet unattended, but eventually nodded. Very well, Your Grace, but I warn you, any attempt to spirit my ward away will be met with the full force of law. Once the door closed behind Sir Percival and the butler, the Duke turned to Violet, his expression grim but determined. We have perhaps 10 minutes before his patience wanes. Listen carefully, for there is only one course of action available to us now. A marriage license, the Duke said without preamble, moving to a concealed wall safe behind his portrait, obtained in London during my recent visit, requiring only our signatures and a witness. Violet stared at him in disbelief as he extracted a document from the safe. Marriage? Your Grace, I cannot possibly— Edmund, he corrected, returning to her side. If we are to be husband and wife, even in name only, you must use my given name. This is madness, Violet whispered, her mind reeling. You cannot sacrifice yourself to save me from Sir Percival. It is no sacrifice. His eyes held hers with steady resolve. As my wife, you would be beyond his reach forever. No magistrate in England would dare challenge a duchess's autonomy at the behest of a former guardian. But your reputation, your position, are secure enough to withstand gossip. He placed the license on his desk, his expression betraying a vulnerability she had not seen before. Miss Thorne, Violet, I did not plan this outcome, but neither did I obtain this license without consideration. When I inquired about your supposed position at Millfield, I also investigated Sir Percival's history. I suspected he might pursue you, though not with such legal maneuvering. So this was your contingency. Violet's voice trembled with emotion she could scarcely identify. A marriage of convenience to thwart Sir Percival's claim. Edmund's gaze softened. I would not frame it so coldly. These weeks at Thornfield, your presence has awakened something I thought long dead. I would not call it convenience that drives me now. A sharp knock at the door interrupted his words. Your Grace, called Bradford's voice, strained with unusual urgency. Sir Percival grows most insistent. 1 moment more, Edmund replied, never taking his eyes from Violet's face. I would not rush you into a decision of such magnitude under normal circumstances, but these are not normal times. and I fear delay may cost us our only advantage. Violet's mind whirled with implications. Marriage to a duke, a man she had known mere weeks, seemed an impossible fantasy. Yet in those weeks, she had glimpsed beneath his austere exterior to the wounded soul beneath. There was kindness in him, and honor, qualities her life had taught her to value above all others. "If we do this," she said quietly, her hand finding the pendant at her throat, "what becomes of your plan to send me to America?" "It becomes unnecessary," Edmund replied, a hint of relief in his tone. "You would remain at Thornfield as my wife, in name and in public standing, though privately—" He hesitated. "Privately, I would demand nothing of you beyond what you freely offer. This I swear." "And if I wish to leave someday?" The question pained her, even as she asked it. "Then I would not prevent it." His voice remained steady, though his eyes betrayed the cost of this promise. "I offer protection, Violet, not imprisonment. The choice must be yours, now and always." Another knock, more insistent. "Your Grace!" Violet drew a deep breath, steadying herself against the tempest of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her reason. In truth, there was but one choice that offered both safety and something else she dared not yet name. "Yes," she whispered, and then more firmly, "Yes, I will marry you." Relief transformed Edmund's features. He squeezed her hand briefly before calling, "Enter." Bradford appeared, his dignified countenance marred by obvious distress. "Sir Percival threatens to summon the local magistrate if you do not produce Miss Thorne immediately." "Excellent timing," Edmund replied with surprising calm. "Bradford, pray find Mrs. Blackwood and bring her to the library. Then inform Sir Percival that Miss Thorne and I will join him shortly with a matter of some importance to discuss." The butler's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected instructions, but he nodded and withdrew without comment. "We have perhaps 5 minutes before Sir Percival's patience expires completely," Edmund said, gathering the license and a pen. "If you harbor any doubts, Violet, speak them now. Once done, this cannot be easily undone." Violet raised her eyes to his, finding unexpected certainty amidst the chaos of the moment. "I have lived too long under another's control. I choose this path freely, Edmund. Whatever comes of it, the choice is mine." Something flickered in his gaze, a warmth that transcended mere gratitude or approval. He offered his arm, and together they proceeded to the library, where Mrs. Blackwood awaited, her expression cycling from confusion to astonishment as Edmund explained their purpose. "A wedding, now? Without banns or preparation?" The housekeeper appeared scandalized, yet beneath her protest lay a curious gleam of satisfaction. "Circumstances demand haste," Edmund replied, setting the license before her. "Will you stand witness, Mrs. Blackwood? I can think of no one more appropriate given your years of loyal service to the Blackwood family." The housekeeper's momentary resistance crumbled beneath the weight of his regard. "Of course, Your Grace. Though it hardly seems proper, propriety must occasionally bow to necessity," Edmund interrupted gently. "Your signature, if you please." With trembling hand, Mrs. Blackwood signed the document. Edmund followed, his bold script declaring his commitment to the world. Then it was Violet's turn, and as she wrote her name beside his, she felt the insubstantial weight of her former life lifting away like morning mist before the sun. "It is done," Edmund declared, folding the license and securing it within his coat. "Now shall we inform Sir Percival of this happy development?" They found their unwelcome visitor pacing the drawing-room, his florid complexion darkened further by impatience. He turned sharply at their entrance, his gaze narrowing as he noted their linked arms. "At last," he snapped, abandoning all pretense of civility. "I trust you have examined the warrant to your satisfaction, Your Grace. I require Miss Thorne's immediate departure." Edmund regarded him with the cool detachment of one observing an unpleasant specimen. "I fear that will be impossible, Sir Percival." "Impossible?" Sir Percival's voice rose dangerously. "Perhaps you misunderstand the legal authority this document represents." "I understand perfectly," Edmund interrupted. "However, the document names Miss Violet Thorne as your ward. That person no longer exists." Sir Percival's eyes darted between them, confusion momentarily replacing anger. "What nonsense is this? Allow me to present my wife, the Duchess of Ravensworth." Edmund's tone carried the unmistakable ring of triumph as he produced the signed marriage license. "Wed but moments ago, with all legal requirements satisfied." The colour drained from Sir Percival's face, then returned in a rush of apoplectic fury. "This is outrageous. A transparent ploy to circumvent my rightful authority. No court will recognize such a hasty arrangement." Every court in England will recognize the union of a duke and his chosen bride, Edmund countered. The license is legitimate, the signatures witnessed. Your wardship is terminated by her marriage, Sir Percival. Your claim to Miss Thorne, to the Duchess, is null and void. Sir Percival snatched the document, scanning it with desperate intensity, seeking any flaw that might invalidate the union. Finding none, he crumpled the paper in his fist. "Return that immediately," Edmund commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, "or face charges of destroying legal documentation." With visible reluctance, Sir Percival smoothed the license and handed it back. "This changes nothing," he snarled. "The girl is unsuitable as a duchess, without breeding, connections, or dowry. When society learns of this misalliance, you shall both be outcasts." "I find I care remarkably little for society's opinion," Edmund replied. "As for suitability, character and intelligence outweigh all other considerations in my estimation. The Duchess possesses both in abundance." Sir Percival's gaze shifted to Violet, malice contorting his features. "You think yourself beyond my reach? Remember this, girl. I know what you are. A merchant's daughter, raised in the colonies among heathens. Your presence will taint the Blackwood line irreparably." "Sir Percival," Edmund interjected, his tone suddenly lethal in its quietness, "you have insulted my wife in my presence. Under normal circumstances, I would demand satisfaction. However, as you are clearly departing my property this instant, never to return, I shall forego that pleasure." He moved toward the bell pull. "Bradford will show you out. Should you ever approach my wife again by word or deed, I shall ensure that certain facts about your business practices reach the appropriate authorities. I believe even your considerable influence would crumble beneath such scrutiny." Sir Percival's face contorted with impotent rage. For a moment Violet feared he might physically lunge at Edmund, but self-preservation prevailed. With a final venomous glare, he jammed his hat upon his head. "This is not finished," he hissed. "No one humiliates Percival Croft without consequence." "On the contrary," Edmund replied, opening the drawing-room door with pointed courtesy, "it is most definitively finished. Good day, Sir Percival." They watched from the window as Sir Percival's carriage departed down the snow-covered drive, its wheels churning the pristine white to muddy slush, a fitting metaphor for the man himself. When the vehicle passed through the gates and disappeared from view, Violet released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Is it truly over?" Edmund turned to her, his expression softening. "His legal claim is severed. His pride is wounded. He may attempt some form of retaliation, but his options are limited. You are safe, Violet." "Safe," she repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue after so many years of uncertainty. "And married. To a duke." A slightly hysterical laugh escaped her. "When I awoke this morning, I could not have imagined such an outcome." "Nor I," Edmund admitted, a hint of wonder in his voice. "Though perhaps we should have seen it coming. Thornfield has not felt so alive since—" He trailed off, old shadows briefly crossing his features. "Since before the fire," Violet completed gently. "Since Isabella." He nodded, surprise flickering in his eyes at her intuitive understanding. "Yes, precisely so." A discreet cough from the doorway interrupted them. Bradford stood there, his composure restored but his eyes betraying his bewilderment at the day's extraordinary events. "Your Grace," he addressed Edmund, then hesitated before adding with careful formality, "Your Grace," to Violet as well. "Mrs. Blackwood inquires whether you wish dinner to be served in the dining room this evening, in light of recent developments." Edmund glanced at Violet, his expression questioning. She nodded, understanding the significance of the gesture, their first decision as a married couple, however unconventional the circumstances. "The dining room, Bradford," Edmund confirmed, "and inform the staff of our marriage. There will be adjustments required, though we shall address them in due course." "Very good, Your Grace." Bradford bowed and withdrew, though not before Violet glimpsed a hint of something like approval in the elderly servant's demeanor. Alone again, they faced each other in a silence laden with unspoken questions. The whirlwind nature of their union left no time to contemplate its practical implications, yet now those considerations pressed upon them with sudden urgency. "I should prepare for dinner," Violet said at last, feeling a need for solitude to process the monumental change in her circumstances. Edmund nodded. "Of course. Mrs. Blackwood will assist you. I believe she has already begun making arrangements befitting your new station." As Violet moved toward the door, he added softly, "Violet, I meant what I said earlier. This marriage may have been hastened by necessity, but that does not mean it cannot become something meaningful in time. We have the freedom now to discover what that might be. She turned back, finding in his gaze a warmth that kindled answering heat within her own heart. I would like that very much, Edmund. His name on her lips seemed to please him immensely, a smile transforming his usually solemn countenance. Until dinner, then. Violet departed with the strange yet comforting knowledge that while her life had changed irrevocably within a single hour, the path ahead, though uncertain, held more promise than peril for the first time in memory. The news of their marriage spread through Thornfield Manor like wildfire, eliciting reactions that ranged from stunned disbelief to quiet satisfaction. Mrs. Blackwood, after her initial shock, embraced her new role as advisor to the young Duchess with surprising enthusiasm, arriving at Violet's chamber with an armful of family jewels long stored in the vault. These belong to the Duchess of Ravensworth, she explained, laying out necklaces and bracelets of dazzling craftsmanship. His Grace instructed me to bring them immediately. Violet stared at the glittering array. I cannot possibly wear these to dinner. Indeed you shall, Mrs. Blackwood countered firmly. The staff must see you properly attired as befits your station. First impressions, Your Grace, are paramount. The title still sounded foreign to Violet's ears, a garment several sizes too large, yet one she must somehow grow to fill. Very well, she conceded, selecting the simplest of the offerings, a delicate diamond necklace that complemented rather than overwhelmed her gown. But I shall continue wearing my pendant beneath. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes softened with understanding. Some treasures derive their value from sentiment rather than substance. No one would ask you to relinquish such a connection to your past. Dinner proved to be a surreal affair. The grand dining room, unused for formal meals since Violet's arrival, had been hastily prepared with all the splendor befitting a ducal household. Candelabras gleamed upon the polished mahogany table, silver service caught the light in dazzling patterns, and a small army of servants attended their every need with precision that spoke of Bradford's rigorous training. Edmund awaited her at the head of the table, rising as she entered. The flicker of appreciation in his gaze as he beheld her in her new finery sent a curious warmth through Violet's veins. "You look magnificent," he said quietly, as he seated her at his right hand, the Duchess's traditional place. "I feel rather like an impostor," Violet confessed in an undertone, as the first course was served. "You are the Duchess of Ravensworth by legal right and ceremony," Edmund replied. "There is no imposture in that. Yet we both know this marriage was one of necessity rather than other considerations." Edmund regarded her thoughtfully over his wineglass. "Necessity may have accelerated our union, but that does not diminish its validity, nor preclude the development of deeper attachment." The meal progressed through multiple courses, their conversation gradually shifting from the strained formality of near strangers to the easier exchange of companions who had shared extraordinary circumstances. By the time dessert was served, a spectacular trifle that Mrs. Blackwood had somehow conjured despite the short notice, Violet found herself laughing at Edmund's wry observations about his London solicitor's perpetual pessimism. "I believe this is the first time I have heard you laugh," Edmund remarked, his expression warming. "It is a sound Thornfield has sorely needed." The intimacy of the observation brought colour to Violet's cheeks. "I have had little cause for merriment in recent years. Then we must endeavour to provide more occasions for joy," he replied, his gaze holding hers with unexpected intensity. "Thornfield has known too much sorrow. Perhaps it is time for renewal." After dinner, they retired to the library by mutual, unspoken consent. The fire had been built to a cheerful blaze, and 2 chairs had been arranged before it, a domestic tableau that highlighted both the comfort and strangeness of their new situation. "I have instructed Bradford to move your belongings to the Duchess's suite," Edmund said as they settled before the fire. "It adjoins my own chambers, but maintains private access. You need not fear unwelcome intrusions." The delicacy with which he approached the subject touched Violet deeply. "Thank you for your consideration. This marriage may have been hasty, but your behaviour has been nothing but honourable." "Honour is the least of what I owe you," he replied, his voice low. "You saved me from a fate worse than death, Violet, a slow withering of spirit in this mausoleum of memories. Whether you know it or not, you breathed life back into Thornfield the moment you crossed its threshold." "I merely accepted the shelter you offered," Violet demurred, though his words stirred something profound within her. "You did far more than that." Edmund leaned forward, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "You played music in rooms long silent. You spoke kindly to servants accustomed to my taciturn commands. You asked questions about Isabella when everyone else feared to speak her name. He rose, moving to the window where moonlight silvered the snowy landscape. Before you came, I existed rather than lived. Each day passed in identical grey succession, duty performed without purpose or pleasure. Then I found you at my gates, and suddenly, he trailed off, seeming to search for words. Suddenly what? Violet asked softly. Colour returned, he finished, turning to face her. Sound, texture, all the dimensions of life I had forgotten how to perceive. The raw honesty of his confession left Violet momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it emerged barely above a whisper. I felt something similar. At Thornfield, for the first time since my parents' death, I have known safety. Not merely physical security, but the peace of being valued for myself alone. Edmund crossed the room to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand in a gesture of surprising vulnerability. Then perhaps this marriage, though born of necessity, might grow into something neither of us dared hope for. Violet gazed into his upturned face, seeing not the imposing Duke of Ravensworth, but simply Edmund, a man who had known profound loss, yet retained the capacity for tenderness. I should like that very much. His fingers tightened around hers. We shall proceed slowly, with patience and care. There is no need to rush what may develop naturally in its own time. The grandfather clock chimed 11, breaking the spell of the moment. Edmund rose, releasing her hand with noticeable reluctance. It grows late. I shall escort you to your chambers. The Duchess's suite proved to be a revelation, a series of interconnected rooms decorated in shades of green and gold, with furnishings that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. A small sitting room opened onto a bedchamber, dominated by a magnificent four-poster bed, beyond which lay a dressing room and private bath. These rooms have been closed since my mother's time, Edmund explained as Violet surveyed her new domain. Mrs. Blackwood has done wonders preparing them on such short notice. They are beautiful, Violet said sincerely, running her fingers across the embroidered counterpane. Far grander than anything I have known. Edmund watched her from the doorway, maintaining a respectful distance. You shall grow accustomed to it in time, though I hope you never lose your appreciation for beauty. It is a quality too often dulled by familiarity. An awkward silence fell between them, laden with the awareness of what traditional marriage might have demanded on such a night. Edmund broke it first, bowing formally from the threshold. I bid you good night, Violet. Should you require anything, my chambers lie beyond that door. He indicated a connecting door discreetly positioned between two wardrobes, though I assure you, it shall remain locked from your side until you choose otherwise. The thoughtfulness of this provision brought tears to Violet's eyes. You are most considerate, Edmund. Not consideration, but respect, he corrected gently. You have had too little of it in your life. I would not compound that deficit. He hesitated, then added with a hint of his earlier warmth, Rest well, Duchess. The title, spoken in his deep voice with such evident affection, no longer seemed quite so ill-fitting. And you as well, Duke. After he departed, Violet stood alone in the magnificent suite, scarcely able to comprehend the day's extraordinary developments. Morning had found her a nameless refugee in a stranger's home. Evening left her a duchess, married to a man whose complexity continued to unfold with each passing hour. She moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit grounds of Thornfield. The gates where she had been found unconscious mere weeks ago now marked the boundary of her domain as Duchess of Ravensworth. Beyond them lay a world that had shown her little kindness, yet within them stood a man who offered not just protection, but the promise of partnership built on mutual respect. As she prepared for bed, assisted by a maid who addressed her as Your Grace with awestruck reverence, Violet found herself contemplating not the past she had escaped, but the future that stretched before her, uncertain, yet filled with possibilities she had never dared imagine. Sleep claimed her quickly, exhaustion from the day's emotional tumult, drawing her into dreams where Edmund's voice echoed a promise, You're home now. The following morning brought with it the first true test of their hasty union. Violet awoke to find a note from Edmund slipped beneath her door, explaining that urgent estate business required his attention, but that he would join her for luncheon. The note concluded with a postscript that both reassured and unsettled her. The staff have been fully informed of our marriage. They will look to you now as Mistress of Thornfield. Do not hesitate to assert your authority as Duchess. Authority as Duchess. The concept seemed as foreign to Violet as the elegant chambers in which she now resided. She had never commanded anyone in her life, had been, in fact, the one commanded for as long as she could remember. How was she to transform overnight from dependent to director? Mrs. Blackwood arrived as Violet finished dressing, bringing with her a household ledger bound in green leather. "His Grace thought you might wish to review the running of Thornfield, Your Grace," the housekeeper explained, settling the substantial volume on a small writing desk. "Though he assures me no changes are expected immediately." Violet eyed the ledger with trepidation. "I confess I know little of managing an estate of this size. Few duchesses arrive with such knowledge," Mrs. Blackwood replied pragmatically. "But you possess intelligence and good sense, qualities more valuable than experience, which comes with time." The morning passed in a crash course on Thornfield's operations, from the kitchen gardens that supplied fresh produce year-round to the rotation of footmen for silver polishing. Violet absorbed as much as she could, grateful for Mrs. Blackwood's patient explanations and tactful guidance. "His Grace has managed most aspects himself these past years," the housekeeper confided, as they concluded their review. "Most unusual for a nobleman of his station, but grief changes one's habits, I suppose." "He seems a most conscientious master," Violet observed. "Indeed, Your Grace. Fair but exacting." Mrs. Blackwood hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic candor, "Though I must say he has shown more animation these past weeks than in all the years since the tragedy. Your presence has been most beneficial." Before Violet could respond to this revelation, a commotion in the entrance hall drew their attention. Female voices, one strident with authority, another placating, echoed through the corridor. "I need no announcement, Peters. Where is Edmund?" "This instant." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes widened in recognition. "Lady Agatha," she whispered to Violet. "His Grace's aunt, his mother's sister, most formidable." Violet barely had time to process this information before the library door flew open to admit a tall, imposing woman of perhaps 60 years, dressed in mourning clothes of impeccable cut. Her silver-streaked hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure beneath a hat adorned with jet beads, and her aquiline features bore a striking resemblance to Edmund's, though lacking his warmth. "Who?" demanded Lady Agatha, fixing Violet with a piercing stare. "Are you?" Violet rose, summoning every ounce of composure her years as Sir Percival's ward had taught her. "I am Violet Blackwood, Duchess of Ravensworth. And you, I believe, are Lady Agatha Harrington." The older woman's face froze in a mask of disbelief. "Duchess? What absurdity is this? Edmund is unmarried." "No longer, my lady," Mrs. Blackwood intervened, curtsying deeply. "His Grace wed yesterday afternoon. Most unexpected, but quite legitimate, I assure you." Lady Agatha's gloved hand flew to her throat in a gesture of theatrical shock. "This is preposterous. Edmund would never marry without consultation, certainly not some unknown female of questionable background." Her gaze raked Violet from head to toe. "Who were your people? What connection brings you to Thornfield?" Before Violet could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the desperate circumstances of her arrival, Edmund's voice cut through the tension from the doorway. "Aunt Agatha, what an unexpected pleasure." Lady Agatha whirled to face her nephew, colour high in her aristocratic cheeks. "Edmund, explain yourself immediately. Peters informs me you have taken a wife without so much as a word to your family. This person," she gestured dismissively toward Violet, "claims the title of Duchess. She claims it because it is hers by right of marriage," Edmund replied with remarkable calm, crossing the room to stand beside Violet. "May I properly introduce my wife, Violet Blackwood, Duchess of Ravensworth. Violet, my aunt, Lady Agatha Harrington." Violet curtsied with perfect form, years of Sir Percival's rigid etiquette training serving her well. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance, Lady Harrington." Lady Agatha ignored the courtesy entirely, focusing her ire on Edmund. "Have you taken leave of your senses? The Blackwood name, the dukedom, these are not trifles to be bestowed on a whim. Who is this girl? What family claims her? Where was she educated? What connections does she bring?" Edmund's expression hardened, though his voice remained controlled. "My wife's personal history is not subject to interrogation, Aunt. Suffice it to say that she is a gentlewoman of admirable character, whose circumstances required immediate intervention. Our marriage may have been hastened by necessity, but I assure you it is both legal and binding." "Necessity?" Lady Agatha seized upon the word with the precision of a falcon spotting prey. "What necessity could possibly justify such precipitous action, unless—" Her eyes narrowed as they flicked between Edmund and Violet. "Is there to be a child? Is that the urgency that drove this misalliance?" Violet felt heat flood her cheeks at the implication. Edmund's response came swiftly, edged with cold anger. "There is no expectant heir, Aunt Agatha. nor any impropriety requiring hasty legitimization. The necessity was one of protection, from circumstances I am not at liberty to disclose without my wife's permission. Lady Agatha sniffed incredulously. Protection? Edmund, you cannot seriously expect me to believe you married this person out of some misguided chivalry. Believe what you will, Edmund replied, his patience visibly fraying. The fact remains, Violet is my wife and Duchess of Ravensworth. Any disrespect shown to her is disrespect to me and the Blackwood name you profess such concern for. A tense silence followed this pronouncement, broken finally by Mrs. Blackwood's diplomatic suggestion that refreshments be served in the drawing-room. Lady Agatha acquiesced with poor grace, sweeping from the library without awaiting her nephew's escort. Once alone with Edmund, Violet released a shaky breath. Your aunt is rather formidable. Formidable is a generous description, Edmund replied with a rueful smile. Aunt Agatha considers herself the guardian of Blackwood propriety. She has spent the past 15 years attempting to arrange a suitable match for me among the daughters of her acquaintance. No wonder she views me as an usurper, Violet murmured. I have thwarted years of careful planning. Edmund took her hand, his touch conveying reassurance. You need fear no real power from her quarter. She may rage and predict social doom, but her influence extends only as far as drawing-room gossip. Will there be more such encounters? Violet asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. More relatives questioning my right to be here? Undoubtedly, Edmund admitted. News of our marriage will spread rapidly through society. There will be curiosity, speculation, perhaps even hostility from certain quarters. But we shall face it together, presenting a united front that brooks no challenge. His confidence bolstered Violet's spirits, yet she could not help wondering how many more Lady Agatha's awaited, how many suspicious glances and whispered insinuations would follow her entrance into society as the Duke of Ravensworth's unexpected bride. In the drawing-room, Lady Agatha had composed herself enough to adopt a veneer of civility, though her keen eyes missed nothing as she observed Violet pour tea with steady hands. Tell me, Duchess, she said, infusing the title with subtle mockery, what accomplishments do you bring to your exalted position? Music, languages, watercolors, perhaps? I play the pianoforte tolerably well, Violet replied evenly, refusing to be baited. I speak Hindi and French fluently, and I read Latin with reasonable proficiency. My watercolors, however, leave much to be desired. Lady Agatha's eyebrows rose fractionally at the mention of Hindi. Hindi, an unusual choice for a gentlewoman's education. I spent my early years in India, Violet explained, seeing no reason to conceal this aspect of her past. My father served the East India Company as a merchant. A merchant's daughter, Lady Agatha murmured, shooting a triumphant glance at Edmund as though her worst suspicions had been confirmed. How cosmopolitan. Edmund set down his cup with deliberate precision. My grandfather, the 7th Duke, made his fortune in shipping before acquiring his title through marriage to Lady Elizabeth Montague. Commerce is hardly foreign to the Blackwood line, aunt. There is commerce, Edmund, and there is trade, Lady Agatha replied with cutting precision. One respectably distant, the other altogether too immediate for comfort. Violet, sensing the conversation spiraling toward greater unpleasantness, sought neutral territory. Lady Harrington, I understand you reside primarily in Bath. Is the assembly there as delightful as reputation suggests? The strategic shift succeeded in diverting Lady Agatha into a lengthy discourse on Bath society, its merits, deficiencies, and hierarchies, allowing Violet to observe her adversary more carefully. Beneath the formidable exterior, she glimpsed something unexpected, genuine concern for Edmund, albeit expressed through controlling interference rather than supportive affection. The visit mercifully concluded after an hour, Lady Agatha departing with the ominous promise to set matters right with the rest of the family regarding Edmund's impulsive decision. Well, Edmund sighed as the carriage bearing his aunt disappeared down the drive. That was precisely as trying as I anticipated. She loves you, Violet observed, surprising herself with the assessment. In her way. Edmund glanced at her curiously. Few perceive that beneath her dragon's exterior. Perhaps it takes one accustomed to difficult guardians to recognize the underlying sentiment, Violet replied with a small smile. Though I must say Sir Percival's form of love was considerably less benevolent than your aunt's. Edmund's expression darkened at the mention of Sir Percival. Has there been any word of his movements since yesterday? None that I am aware of, Violet answered. Do you think he will attempt further action against me? Against you directly? No. The marriage has removed his legal leverage entirely. Edmund guided her back toward the house, his hand warm at the small of her back. But Sir Percival strikes me as a man who does not accept defeat graciously. We would be wise to remain vigilant. As they entered the great hall, Bradford approached with a silver salver bearing a telegram. "Delivered just now, Your Grace. From London." Edmund opened the message, his expression shifting from curiosity to grim satisfaction as he read its contents. "It seems Sir Percival departed for the continent this morning, most hastily according to my solicitor's sources." "The continent?" Violet echoed, hope rising within her. "Then he has abandoned his pursuit." "For the present," Edmund confirmed, though his tone remained cautious. "Though I suspect his retreat may be strategic rather than final. My solicitor will continue monitoring his movements." The news, however qualified, lifted an invisible weight from Violet's shoulders. With Sir Percival at least temporarily removed as a threat, and Lady Agatha's inquisition survived, she found herself contemplating her new reality with growing confidence. That evening, as they dined together in the smaller family dining room, Edmund raised his wine-glass in a quiet toast to the Duchess of Ravensworth, who faced her first day of ducal politics with remarkable composure. Violet smiled, touching her glass to his, and to the Duke, who defended his impulsive choice of bride with admirable conviction. "Not impulsive," Edmund corrected, his gaze holding hers with sudden intensity. "Accelerated, perhaps, but increasingly inevitable from the moment you arrived at Thornfield's gates." The warmth in his voice stirred something deep within Violet, a recognition that their marriage, though born of necessity, had awakened feelings neither had anticipated. As snowflakes began to fall outside the windows, casting Thornfield once more into winter's embrace, she realized with quiet certainty that she no longer wished to leave this place, or the man who had made it her home. Winter's grasp upon Thornfield loosened gradually over the ensuing weeks, each day bringing subtle changes to the landscape, icicles thinning at the eaves, patches of earth emerging from beneath their snowy blanket, birdsong returning to dormant gardens. Within the manor, a similar thaw transpired between its master and mistress. Their marriage, begun as an expedient solution to immediate danger, evolved with cautious tenderness. Edmund respected Violet's need for independence, never pressing for intimacies she might not be prepared to offer, while Violet found herself increasingly drawn to the complex man beneath the Duke's formal exterior. They established a comfortable routine. Breakfasts shared in the morning room overlooking the East Gardens, separate pursuits during the day, Edmund attending to estate matters while Violet grew into her role as mistress of Thornfield, and evenings spent together in the library, where conversation flowed more freely with each passing night. It was during one such evening, as February yielded to March, that Edmund broached a subject they had tacitly avoided since their hasty wedding. "The London season begins next month," he remarked, setting aside the estate ledger he had been reviewing. "Under normal circumstances, we would be expected to take up residence at Blackwood House and participate in the usual round of social engagements." Violet looked up from her book, apprehension flickering across her features. "And now, what is expected of us?" "Nothing we do not choose," Edmund assured her. "I have not participated in the season since inheriting the title. Society has grown accustomed to my absence. Yet as a newly married duke, surely there would be considerable interest in your return?" Violet observed, her fingers unconsciously touching the glass pendant at her throat. A gesture Edmund had come to recognize as signaling her anxiety. "Considerable indeed," he acknowledged. "Our appearance would cause quite the sensation, particularly given the unconventional nature of our union." Violet set her book aside entirely, meeting his gaze with direct honesty. "Would my presence embarrass you, Edmund? A merchant's daughter from India, thrust suddenly into aristocratic circles?" "Never," he replied with such vehemence that Violet started slightly. "Any embarrassment would be entirely on society's part, for failing to recognize the quality of character that transcends accidents of birth." His expression softened as he added, "My concern is for you, Violet, for the scrutiny and potential unkindness you might face." The consideration behind his words touched her deeply. In the weeks since their marriage, she had come to recognize the profound decency that formed Edmund's core, a fundamental goodness, often masked by his reserved demeanor. "Perhaps," she suggested after a thoughtful pause, "we might test the waters with something less daunting than a full London season, a controlled introduction to society on terms more favorable to us." Edmund's brow lifted in surprised approval. "What did you have in mind?" You mentioned once that Thornfield has not hosted guests in 15 years, Violet replied, an idea forming as she spoke. What if we were to change that? A small gathering, dinner perhaps, with carefully selected guests who might later champion our union in wider circles. A smile, still rare but increasingly frequent, transformed Edmund's austere features. Strategic and sensible. Lady Agatha would be appalled by such calculation, which recommends the plan even further. He considered for a moment. My cousin James, Viscount Halford, would come. He has always stood apart from family politics, and the Winstons from the neighbouring estate have shown consistent friendship despite my reclusiveness. As they continued compiling their guest list, Violet marvelled at how naturally they had fallen into partnership, complementing each other's strengths, accommodating vulnerabilities without judgment. It was not yet the profound love celebrated in poetry, perhaps, but something equally valuable. Mutual respect, layered with growing affection. The dinner party was scheduled for the last Saturday in March. Mrs. Blackwood and Bradford approached the preparations with near religious fervour. The first formal entertainment at Thornfield in 15 years represented, in their view, nothing less than resurrection. Silver polished to blinding crystal without a smudge, linens pressed to perfection. Mrs. Blackwood recited like a catechism as she reviewed arrangements with Violet. Cook has planned 7 courses, though she frets about the spring vegetables not being quite up to London standards. Thornfield's produce need bow to none, Violet assured her, and guests will appreciate authenticity over pretension. The day of the dinner arrived with surprising swiftness. As twilight approached, Violet stood before the mirror in her chambers, regarding her transformation with wondering eyes. Edmund had insisted on sending to London for appropriate garments befitting her station, overriding her protests with gentle obstinacy. A duchess must look the part, he had argued, particularly for her first formal appearance as mistress of Thornfield. The result was the gown she now wore, midnight blue silk that shimmered like deep water, cut in the latest fashion, yet modest enough to silence potential critics. At her throat rested a diamond necklace from the Blackwood collection, carefully selected to accommodate the glass pendant she refused to relinquish, now concealed beneath her bodice, close to her heart. A soft knock at the connecting door between their chambers preceded Edmund's entrance. He paused on the threshold, his gaze travelling from Violet's carefully arranged hair to the sweep of her gown with unmistakable admiration. "You are magnificent," he said simply. Violet felt a blush warm her cheeks. "The gown is lovely. It is the woman who elevates the garment, not the reverse." Edmund approached, offering a small velvet box. "I have something for you, if you will accept it." Inside nestled a pair of sapphire earrings, their deep blue perfectly matching her gown. "They belong to my mother," Edmund explained. "She always intended them for the future Duchess. They are yours by right, but also by my heartfelt wish." Violet touched the stones reverently. "They're beautiful. Thank you for entrusting me with something so meaningful." As she fastened the earrings, their eyes met in the mirror, his warm amber holding her clear grey, and something shifted between them, a deepening of connection that transcended their carefully maintained boundaries. The moment was interrupted by Bradford's discreet announcement that the first guests had arrived. Together, they descended the grand staircase to assume their roles as host and hostess, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensworth, welcoming visitors to Thornfield Manor for the first time in a generation. The evening progressed with surprising ease. James, Viscount Halford, proved to be a jovial counterpoint to Edmund's reserve, quick to laugh, charming in his appreciation of Violet's wit, and openly supportive of their union. "Cousin Edmund married. I scarcely believed it," he confided to Violet during dinner. "But seeing you together, I cannot imagine a more suitable match. You've brought light back to his eyes, a miracle many of us had ceased hoping for." The Winstons, a dignified couple who had known Edmund since childhood, showed similar approval, Lady Winston taking Violet aside after dinner with maternal warmth. "My dear, you must not concern yourself with the whispers that will inevitably follow your entrance into society," she advised. "Those of us who have watched Edmund retreat into solitude these 15 years care only that he has found companionship at last. The circumstances matter far less than the result." The evening's most surprising development came when Sir Geoffrey Pembroke, a neighbouring baronet known for his unassailable social standing, requested a private word with Edmund. Violet observed their conversation from across the drawing-room, noting her husband's expression shift from wariness to startled pleasure. Later, as they bid farewell to their guests, Edmund explained the exchange. Sir Geoffrey has offered to host a small reception next month, ostensibly for the spring planting, but in reality to present you to local society under his family's protection. That seems unexpectedly generous, Violet remarked, as the last carriage departed down the moonlit drive. Indeed, though his motivation may not be entirely altruistic, Edmund's mouth quirked in amusement. It seems his daughter, Miss Pembroke, has long harboured hopes regarding a certain reclusive duke. By publicly embracing our marriage, he demonstrates both his daughter's magnanimity and final abandonment of those aspirations. Violet laughed, a sound that came more easily with each passing day at Thornfield. Politics within politics, and yet the outcome benefits us nonetheless. A common feature of aristocratic manoeuvring, Edmund agreed, offering his arm to escort her inside. But I count tonight an unqualified success, regardless of underlying motivations. You charmed them all, Violet, exactly as I knew you would. In the quiet sanctuary of the library, where they habitually retired for private conversation after public engagements, Edmund poured 2 glasses of port, another small tradition they had established. The fire burned low in the grate, casting a golden glow that softened the room's scholarly austerity. A toast, he proposed, handing Violet her glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, she echoed, the crystal catching firelight as their glasses touched. They settled into their usual chairs, comfortable silence stretching between them, a silence that no longer felt awkward but rather companionable, even intimate in its own way. Edmund, Violet ventured at length, her voice soft in the quiet room, there is something I've wondered but hesitated to ask. He regarded her attentively. You may ask me anything, Violet. Always. When you found me at your gates that night, why did you bring me inside yourself? You might have sent servants, you might have summoned the parish, yet you carried me across your threshold with your own hands. Edmund's gaze turned inward, as though revisiting that fateful night. When he spoke, his voice carried a note she had not heard before, a vulnerability rarely revealed. I had been abroad for months, he began slowly. Not for business, as I told the staff, but on a personal pilgrimage of sorts, visiting places Catherine and Isabella had loved, seeking, I hardly know what, absolution perhaps, closure. I found neither. He rose, moving to stand before the fire. I returned to Thornfield that night feeling more hollow than when I'd departed. The storm matched my inner landscape, cold, merciless, obliterating, and then at my very gates I found you. Edmund turned to face her, firelight casting his features in gold and shadow. Something compelled me to stop, to approach you myself, rather than sending William. When I touched your face, felt life still pulsing beneath the cold. It was as though the universe offered a second chance. Not to save Catherine and Isabella, nothing can undo that loss, but to save someone. To act, rather than remain frozen in grief. He crossed to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand in a gesture reminiscent of their wedding night. I carried you across my threshold, because in that moment, you represented everything I thought lost forever. Hope, possibility, future. Before I even knew your name, you were already changing Thornfield, changing me. The raw honesty of his confession left Violet speechless, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. Without conscious thought, she leaned forward, her free hand rising to touch his cheek with gentle fingers. And you, she whispered, gave me shelter when the world had turned its back. You offered protection without price, dignity without demand. Their faces were close now, breaths mingling in the space between. Violet could see the flecks of gold in Edmund's amber eyes, feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Time seemed suspended, the moment stretching like glass beneath a flame. Then, with exquisite gentleness, Edmund closed the distance between them. His lips touched hers in a kiss as soft as a question, offering rather than taking. Violet answered without hesitation, her fingers sliding into his hair as the kiss deepened into something neither had anticipated, yet both had perhaps secretly desired. When they parted, Edmund rested his forehead against hers, his voice barely audible. I did not expect this gift when I found you in the snow. Nor I, Violet replied, her heart too full for eloquence, but I am profoundly grateful for it. In that moment, as March winds whispered around Thornfield's ancient walls, something fundamental shifted within its chambers, a house of mourning transformed at last into a home of promise. Spring arrived at Thornfield Manor with gentle insistence, coaxing life from soil long dormant beneath winter's shroud. The formal gardens, neglected for years despite the groundskeeper's diligent maintenance, burst into riotous color, as Violet directed the replanting of beds, according to designs she had discovered in the estate archives, patterns laid out by Edmund's grandmother, the botanically inclined 7th Duchess. She would be pleased to see her vision restored, Edmund remarked one mild April afternoon as they walked the gravel paths between newly trimmed hedges and emerging perennials. And more pleased still to know her successor shares her passion for growing things. Violet smiled, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat against the spring sunshine. There is something deeply satisfying about nurturing life from seemingly barren earth. Each green shoot feels like a small victory. Edmund's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity that had developed between them in the weeks since that transformative evening in the library. A sentiment that extends beyond gardens, I think. His meaning was clear to them both. Since their first kiss, the walls between duty and desire had dissolved gradually, their marriage evolving from convenient arrangement to genuine partnership. The connecting door between their chambers now remained unlocked, though they still approached physical intimacy with mutual respect and tender patience, each step forward taken by choice rather than obligation. The reception at Sir Geoffrey Pembroke's estate had proven a resounding success, with local society accepting, even embracing, the new Duchess of Ravensworth. Lady Agatha remained a dissenting voice, of course, but her dire predictions of social catastrophe had failed to materialize, leaving her to nurse her disappointment in Bath among sympathetic dowagers. As April yielded to May, preparations began for their first journey to London together. Edmund had decided that a brief appearance during the latter part of the season would satisfy social expectations while limiting Violet's exposure to potential unpleasantness. Blackwood House on Berkeley Square, shuttered for 15 years, had been reopened and staffed in anticipation of their arrival. "I have something for you," Edmund announced on the evening before their departure, drawing Violet into his study where a wooden chest inlaid with mother-of-pearl stood upon his desk. "It belonged to Isabella's mother, my sister-in-law Catherine. I believe she would have wished you to have it." Violet approached the chest with reverent hands. "Are you certain, Edmund? These memories are precious to you, which is precisely why they should not remain locked away," he replied softly. Catherine believed in joy, in beauty, in celebrating life's gifts. She would not have wanted her belongings preserved like museum relics. Within the chest lay an assortment of feminine treasures, delicately embroidered handkerchiefs, a tortoise-shell hairbrush and mirror set, several leather-bound journals, and beneath these, wrapped in silk, a small portrait miniature of a young girl with solemn eyes and auburn curls. Isabella. She was beautiful, Violet whispered, tracing the delicate brushwork with a gentle fingertip. "She was extraordinary," Edmund agreed, his voice thick with memory. "Wise beyond her years, with a laugh that could illuminate the darkest room." Violet carefully returned the portrait to its silk wrapping, her heart aching for the child lost and the uncle who had loved her beyond measure. As she did so, a folded paper fell from between the journals, a drawing rendered in a child's hand but with surprising skill, a glass house filled with flowers, and beside it, two figures, a tall man and a small girl, holding hands. "Isabella's work," Edmund explained, his expression soft with remembrance. "She loved the glass houses at Kew Gardens. We visited whenever I returned from the continent." Violet studied the drawing, noting the careful attention paid to the flowers within the glass structure. She had remarkable talent. "She did," Edmund agreed, then hesitated before adding, "There is something about your smile, Violet, a certain expression when you are particularly pleased, that reminds me of her. I noticed it first when you played the pianoforte for Jenny." Instead of discomfort at the comparison, Violet felt a strange sense of completion, as though a circle long broken had somehow been rejoined. "I should have liked to know her. She would have adored you," Edmund said with quiet certainty, "just as I have come to." The words, spoken simply yet profound in their implication, hung in the air between them. Edmund had not yet declared love explicitly, nor had Violet, though their growing attachment had become increasingly evident in 1,000 small ways. His hand at her back when they entered a room together, her instinctive turning toward him when something amused her, the way their bodies sought each other in sleep. Their arrival in London created precisely the measured stir Edmund had anticipated. The Duke of Ravensworth's return to society after 15 years would have been noteworthy under any circumstances. His appearance with an unexpected duchess naturally intensified interest. Yet Edmund's unassailable position, combined with strategic introductions arranged by Viscount Halford and the Winstons, ensured that Violet received the basic courtesies due her rank, if not universal warmth. Lady Harrington continues to suggest I was a governess elevated beyond my station through suspicious circumstances, Violet reported with wry amusement after one particularly stilted drawing-room encounter, while Countess Langley remains convinced I must be a foreign princess traveling incognito. Apparently my accent contains exotic inflections, betraying noble Eastern lineage. Edmund laughed, a sound that once would have been unthinkable within the somber walls of Blackwood House, but now came with increasing frequency. Let them speculate. The truth, that I found an extraordinary woman unconscious at my gates and recognized her value immediately, is far too romantic for society's cynical palate. Their weeks in London passed in a carefully calibrated balance of social obligations and private enjoyments. Edmund introduced Violet to his favorite haunts, the British Museum's quiet galleries, the secluded corners of Hyde Park, a small bookshop in Mayfair whose proprietor greeted the Duke as an old friend rather than an exalted patron. Violet, in turn, brought fresh perspective to familiar sights, her observations often startling Edmund with their insight. It was during a private viewing of the Royal Academy's summer exhibition, arranged by Viscount Halford, who served on its board, that the final piece of their shared puzzle fell into place. "This reminds me of northern India," Violet remarked, studying a landscape of mountains shrouded in mist. "Near Shimla, where my father's company maintained a summer residence, the quality of light is remarkably similar." Edmund, standing beside her, stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Shimla? Your family resided there?" "For several summers during my childhood," Violet confirmed, glancing at him curiously. "Why do you ask?" A strange expression crossed Edmund's features, recognition mingled with disbelief. "The glass pendant you wear," he said slowly. "Might I examine it more closely?" Puzzled by the request, but trusting him implicitly, Violet drew the pendant from beneath her bodice. Edmund took it gently in his hand, holding it toward the gallery's skylight to study the faint design within the crystal. "All these years," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I should have recognized it immediately, but I never thought—" He looked into her eyes, his own bright with unshed tears. "Violet, this is a Blackwood family crest, specifically the variation used by my brother James." The world seemed to tilt beneath Violet's feet. "That's impossible. This was my mother's, the only possession she insisted I keep when everything else was sold after their deaths." "Your mother," Edmund said carefully, "was her name Elizabeth? Elizabeth Thorne, formerly Elizabeth Carrington?" Violet stared at him in shock. "Yes, but how could you possibly know that?" Edmund guided her to a nearby bench, his hand steady beneath her elbow. "Because Elizabeth Carrington was my brother's ward, before she married your father. She was a distant cousin on our mother's side, orphaned young and placed in James's care. When she chose to marry a merchant, rather than the nobleman James had selected for her, she was effectively banished from family connections." "But that would mean—" Violet could scarcely form the thought, let alone speak it. "That you are, by blood, connected to the very family you married into," Edmund confirmed gently. "A Blackwood relative, however distant, and the legal ward of my brother before your birth." Violet's mind reeled with implications. The pendant, a parting gift from Catherine, James's wife, when your mother left England. Catherine disagreed with James's harsh judgment and maintained correspondence with Elizabeth in secret. I discovered their letters years later, after the fire. Edmund's voice softened with wonder. "That pendant was meant to guarantee you sanctuary with any Blackwood, should you ever require it. A promise Catherine made to your mother that circumstances prevented her from fulfilling. Until I appeared at your gates," Violet whispered. "Until then," Edmund agreed, his eyes holding hers with profound tenderness, "though I knew nothing of the connection when I found you." "The universe has strange ways of fulfilling its promises," Violet mused, her fingers closing around the pendant, no longer merely a treasured keepsake, but a physical link to the past and future both. That night, as they returned to Blackwood House through streets gilded by gaslight, Violet felt a profound sense of completion, as though the final piece of a complex puzzle had slipped into place, revealing a pattern of meaning in what once seemed random circumstance. In their private chambers, as Edmund helped remove the sapphire earrings that had become her signature adornment for formal occasions, she turned to face him with newfound clarity. "I love you," she said simply, the words rising from her heart with the inevitability of dawn following night. "Not because fate or blood or mysterious pendants drew us together, but because of who you are. The man who lifted me from the snow and whispered, 'You're home now.' Edmund's hands stilled, his amber eyes meeting hers with matching intensity. "And I love you, Violet Blackwood, not as the relative I never knew existed, nor as the woman who brought Thornfield back to life, though both are true. I love you for your courage, your compassion, your unfailing grace in circumstances that would have broken a lesser spirit." Their kiss held the promise of all that lay ahead, not merely passion, though that burned bright between them, but partnership grounded in mutual respect and genuine affection. Summer found them back at Thornfield, where the gardens bloomed in vibrant testament to renewal. The glass house, long abandoned after Isabella's death, had been restored under Violet's direction, its panes gleaming in the June sunshine as exotic blooms unfurled within its protective embrace. It was there, among orchids and ferns reminiscent of her Indian childhood, that Violet shared her most precious news with Edmund, the promise of new life stirring beneath her heart, due to arrive as winter returned to Thornfield's gates. "Life completing its circle," Edmund murmured, his hand gentle against her still flat abdomen. "From winter's despair to winter's hope." As autumn painted Thornfield's surrounding woodlands in russet and gold, Edmund had the manor's imposing gates replaced. The new design incorporated an elegant archway of wrought iron, its apex bearing the Blackwood crest, flanked by 2 words forged in gleaming metal: "Home Now." And when December snows again blanketed the estate in pristine white, a child's first cry echoed through Thornfield's halls, a daughter with her mother's clear grey eyes and her father's determined chin, named Catherine Isabella Blackwood, in honor of those whose love had transcended time and circumstance, to unite 2 souls who believed themselves forever lost. Violet, watching Edmund cradle their daughter with reverent hands beside the library fire, touched the glass pendant that still rested at her throat. No longer a mystery or mere keepsake, it remained a talisman of the journey that had brought her, unconscious and desperate, to the gates of Thornfield, and to the heart of the man who had lifted her from despair's edge, with 4 simple words that had changed everything: "You're home now." In life's deepest winter, when all paths seem buried beneath grief's unforgiving snow, a single act of compassion can become the first footprint toward redemption. Edmund and Violet's journey reminds us that true healing rarely comes from withdrawal, but from the courage to extend one's hand to another in need, even when our own hearts bear unhealed wounds. Their story speaks to the quiet power of recognizing home not as a place defined by walls and gates, but as the sanctuary created when 2 souls acknowledge each other's worth beyond societal measures of value. It reminds us that genuine nobility emerges not from titles or bloodlines, but from the choice to protect rather than exploit vulnerability, to offer dignity rather than demand submission. Perhaps most poignantly, Thornfield's transformation from mausoleum of memories to cradle of new beginnings illustrates that grief, however profound, need not become our permanent address. Though we cannot rewrite the past's painful chapters, we may still, through love's patient alchemy, transform their meaning within our ongoing story. In the end, Edmund and Violet discovered what we all seek beneath our varied circumstances: the profound comfort of being truly seen by another, the healing grace of belonging, and the quiet miracle of finding, often where least expected, that we are finally, irrevocably home. Did Violet and Edmund's journey from wintry isolation to springtime love touch your heart? If their story of finding home in each other's arms warmed your soul on this cold evening, please subscribe to ensure you never miss another tale of redemption and romance from our collection. What moment touched you most deeply? Was it Edmund's discovery of Violet at his gates, their defiance against Sir Percival, or perhaps the revelation of the pendant's true meaning? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Each reflection adds another dimension to the tapestry we weave together. Remember, every great love story deserves to be shared. If Edmund and Violet's path from strangers to soulmates resonated with you, help spread their tale by liking this video and recommending it to fellow romance enthusiasts who appreciate stories where love triumphs over society's harsh judgments. Until our next journey together through time and tender hearts, remember that sometimes the most profound homecomings begin with 4 simple words: "You're home now."